So our next speaker is Marnette Hofer. Marnette Hofer is the executive director and archivist of Heritage Hall Museum and Archives in South Dakota. And today she will take us on an unexpected journey connecting South Dakota to the North Caucasus through food, migration, and cultural memory. Her presentation, Chislic versus Chislic, from the North Caucasus to South Dakota, explores how a dish long associated with the Caucasus may have traveled or have traveled across continents and generations before becoming an iconic part of South Dakota's identity. More broadly, her work reminds us that some of the most exciting scholarship begins by asking questions that connect seemingly distant places and communities, and a mission that lies at the very heart of this association. Marnette will also encourage us to think about the multiple layers of memory embedded within the story, from the Caucasian origins of the dish to its new roots in Dakota territory and the broader histories of displacement, migration, settlement that shaped the American Midwest. Welcome, Marnette.
Good morning. Well, actually, it might be afternoon by you.
Yes. Yeah, that's true.
I am happy to be with you.
Yes.
And I mean, thank you. Thank you so much for having me here today. This is a wonderful gathering, and I'm pleased to be a part of it. However, you may be wondering what a gal from South Dakota in the middle of the United States has to share with a group like this, and it is definitely a fair question. Feeling a little out of my element here, but I want to share with you the story of Chislic. So Freeman, South Dakota is known as the Chislic capital of the world. But as we sometimes tell our guests, Shashlik is the granddaddy of Chislic. And I'd like to start by telling you what South Dakota Chislic is, and then talk about how it got here and the adaptations it made during the journey. As you may have guessed, Chislic is quite simply meat on a stick. Traditionally, it could be lamb, it could be mutton. Today, it might be beef, pork, goat, venison, or even buffalo. It might be grilled or fried. Traditionally, it was served on wooden skewers, but today you might also find it served as loose chunks to be skewered with toothpicks. It often comes with crackers. It might include grilled onions. Simple garlic salt is the traditional go-to, but increasingly other variations abound. So I grew up on a farm in southeastern South Dakota, just east of the town of Freeman. It was a diversified farm with cattle, chickens, a few pigs, and some goats. And this is me with Tiny Tim. He was one of my favorites. But we did not raise the goats to be pets. And the one thing that we made with goat meat was Chislic. This is not an everyday food. It was reserved for special occasions when friends and family came to visit. And I have very good memories associated with those times and that food. I did not realize until many years later that Chislic was unique to our area. Even a century, I'm sorry, I lost my place. Even a century after it was introduced, it was not well known beyond southeastern South Dakota. In a 2005 issue of South Dakota magazine, journalist Rich Preheim wrote, "Open a map of South Dakota, place the point of a protractor on Freeman, on US Highway 81, a couple of inches north of Yankton, and draw a circle with a radius representing about 30 miles. That is the Chislic Circle. the home of a culinary curiosity. So if you could step back in time to the late 1800s and early 1900s here in southeastern South Dakota, you might have found Chislic served during Objinki, the harvest celebration shared with all the neighbors who had helped bring in the crops. The old timers used to say that Chislic and homemade ice cream went together well. In the years that followed, Chislic became big business in the Chislic Circle. It was served at bars and restaurants. It was sold ready to cook at grocery stores. It was considered appropriate at virtually any gathering, weddings, graduation parties, birthdays, anniversaries, the 4th of July, and at county fairs. By the 1960s and 70s, when young people left for college, they brought Chislic with them, cooking it up for their new friends or bringing those friends home to try it for themselves for the first time. Even Tom Brokaw, the South Dakota native and nationally known TV news anchor, recalled knowing Freeman well. During his years attending Yankton College, he and his friends would make the drive up the road specifically to have Chislic in Freeman. When families gathered or visitors came through, Chislic was often on the menu. And travelers passing through the region made a point to stop at local establishments and taste it for themselves. And just as a pebble thrown into a pond creates a ripple effect, Chislic began to spread, and a South Dakota tradition was born. And then South Dakota made it official. In the spring of 2018, the South Dakota legislature officially recognized what locals already knew. Senate Bill 96 designated Chislic as the official South Dakota state nosh. Nosh being a Yiddish word for a light meal or a small light snack or a small meal. Reportedly, some of the steak and potatoes contingent wanted to reserve the title of state food for future use. Freeman moved quickly. After a series of public meetings, a small group of us organized the very first South Dakota Chislic Festival. We initially imagined a relaxed Saturday evening on Main Street, but when the announcement went out on social media, it took on a life of its own. People from across the region and actually across the United States started liking and sharing and making plans to attend. The day came, we thought, well, maybe we'll up our numbers and maybe, 2,000 or 3,000 people. But on that last Saturday of July 2018, an estimated 8,000 to 10,000 people converged on our town of 1,300. The grounds were packed. People waited in line for hours. The EMTs even had to be called. Roads were congested for miles around, sending many to area restaurants and grocery stores, which promptly sold out of every stick of Chislic they had, in and well beyond the Chislic Circle. It was overwhelming, but also very exciting. After that, Chislic began appearing on menus outside the Chislic Circle, and today you'll find it across the state. We had a Chislic house in Freeman for a couple of years, featuring fun marinades and takeoffs on the Chislic theme. And for a time, Sioux Falls, South Dakota's largest city, was home to a restaurant called Urban Chislic, which showcased the dish in all sorts of creative variations. The mayor of Flavortown himself, Guy Fieri, brought his famous Chevy Camaro and Food Network show, Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives, to Sioux Falls to try some Chislic. And locally, people have invented Chislic burgers, Chislic pizza, and Chislic tacos, among other inventive takes on the original. So after the festival, I took on the challenge of tracing Chislic's history. But while it was well known in our area, it was not well documented. There were newspaper advertisements and scattered references, but it certainly wasn't the kind of thing you'd find in a cookbook. It was simply passed on from generation to generation, shared through a common social experience. Then, in the spring of 2019, I stumbled upon a wonderful podcast called Caucasus Talk, hosted by two Americans living in the North Caucasus, talking about the Chislic experience. And I immediately recognized that social essence that makes Chislic so unique. I sent an email, and several weeks later, found myself a guest on their podcast, telling their listeners the same story that I'm sharing with you today. How remarkable to find the spirit of Chislic still carries the social DNA of Chislic all these years later. And as I kept digging, I did find various references to one man who is often credited with introducing Chislic to the state, Johann Holworth, and we'll come back to him in a minute. Southeast South Dakota and the Eastern Dakotas were home to a large population of Germans from Russia. Our forebears were German-speaking peoples who moved to Russia in the late 1700s and early 1800s at the invitation of Catherine the Great and later Alexander I, but drawn by the freedoms and the opportunities offered to them there. Many in our area descend from those who lived for nearly a century in the Black Sea region and as far north as Volhynia, west of Kiev. They lived in German villages, in very tight-knit communities that held fast to their language, their traditions, their culture, and their German identity. So when Tsar Alexander II issued a decree in 1871 to Russianize the country, threatening the freedoms that these communities had enjoyed, a mass exodus began. Meanwhile, in the United States, a series of treaties between 1851 and 1868 had systematically altered the Great Plains, displacing indigenous peoples to make way for the railroad and for settlement. The Homestead Act of 1862 and Canada's Dominion Lands Act of 1872 then opened millions of acres for these new arrivals. Between 1873 and 1914, 100,000 Germans from Russia came to the United States, and another 150,000 relocated to Canada. Today, we do have to wonder whether they even paused to consider those who had been displaced, both here and in Dakota Territory and back in Russia. And of course, we do not know. What we do know is that life on the open prairie was not easy. Conditions were hard. The weather was so unpredictable. They relied on their neighbors to help break the land, build their homes, and establish their communities. And after the brutal winters had passed, there were many opportunities to gather. Freeman was established in 1879 with the coming of the railroad, giving these scattered settlers a place to meet. So, area 4th of July celebrations were special, festive events that brought everyone to town. And Johann Holworth knew just the right food to prepare. Johann was born in 1849, and he grew up in Crimea, in a village on the far eastern edge near the Kerch Strait. As a young carpenter, he surely had opportunities to encounter Chislic. And that social experience, good food, good hospitality, was not forgotten. Johann came to America in 1876, and he eventually set up shop as a carpenter on Freeman's Main Street. So when the crowds came, Johann knew exactly what to serve. But certain innovations were required. Now, sheep were easy to find. In those early years, the small farms scattered across the countryside were very diverse operations, and most people did keep a few sheep for wool, meat, and tallow. Champours, to skewer the meat, however, were not something you found in Dakota. Willow patches were, and a willow branch cut just the right length, split and whittled to a point, made a perfect skewer. Wash and boil it after every use, and you could reuse those skewers as many times as needed. Trees were scarce, so slowly roasting meat over coals seemed wasteful. Instead, after butchering, they put the trimmings into a kettle and rendered them, melting the fat so it could be strained and used to deep fat fry their mutton or lamb. Some added a couple of garlic cloves for flavor. Later, garlic salt became the standard seasoning. Crackers replaced the flatbread. And somewhere along the way, that thick German brogue transformed Chislic into Chislic. From grilling lamb over a Mongol in the North Caucasus to German settlers adapting the dish on the Dakota prairies, to harvest celebrations and Saturday nights in the Chislic Circle, to the South Dakota State nosh served at restaurants and festivals across the state. It is a straight line of cultural transmission from the Caucasus to southeastern South Dakota. Meat on a stick, carrying in with it centuries of migration, innovation, and community. And that rich history makes the experience today all the better. Thank you so much for listening and for allowing me to be part of your day. I have included my email here in case anyone wants to continue the conversation.